Good afternoon. It's Patrick Dwyer here with Travis Lazaroff at Aligned Wealth.
Yeah, and today we're going to sit and interview Pat and hear a little bit about our managing partner, Pat, and how he got into the business.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my family was always in the wealth management business. My father, Jim Dwyer, the rest of his soul, was he was a partner at EF Hutton, and he ran the Midwest for EF Hutton. EF Hutton subsequently was like sold to Shearson Lehman or somebody like that over the years. I forget, but and then my father was what is now Morgan Stanley. Was at Smith Barney, which was sold to Morgan Stanley like a long time ago. He was a regional director there. And so I always wanted to get in the investment management business. I always wanted to be a wealth advisor because that was the business my dad did. And I started out my career after graduate school. I went to work in what's called the JET program at Merrill Lynch. And that was the program to be in, management program in the wealth management industry in the 90s. When Merrill was like working for Google, it was the hottest company. It was like, because that was during the huge secular bull market of the 1980s and 90s. And so that's where I began my career, had a great career there. It was a lot of fun. But the business really changed after 2008. I built a business, really thoroughly enjoyed, serving clients. That was my favorite part of the business. But, as the banks got bigger, they changed, they became more bureaucratic. And, by my way of thinking, we're just really not innovating anymore and not necessarily, they were doing what was best for the banks, not necessarily what was best for their clients. And, this side of the business on the RIA side, you really have the potential to deliver for clients in a very different way, because you have a lot more freedom and the business model is simpler. You're just serving clients. You're not serving institutions. You're not making loans. You're just dealing with their core function of that wealth management and planning for the families, which is really fun, because you're not distracted by all the other things that a bank needs to do to make money, that you don't really have anything to do with your client. I moved to Miami when, like after I started at Merrill in the management program. I moved down here and I was supposed to leave and go into management. I just never did. Met my wife, raised 4 kids, did all that while I was working a ton, and really enjoyed the business. I would say the last 10 years of working at a wirehouse was not very pleasant. After 2008, it just didn't wasn't the same, wasn't as enjoyable. I would say this side of the business, the entrepreneurial side of the business, is a lot more fun.
Yeah, and I think from an entrepreneurial standpoint, when I met you and I immediately knew that I wanted you to be my mentor. And the biggest piece of that is I looked at what your kids are doing, and your kids are entrepreneurs. I think the biggest thing is you can really judge a person by how they raise their kids. And tell me a little bit about how you thought about that and how you really put those guardrails to ensure that all your kids are doing as successful as they are.
Oh, thank you for saying that. Oh, that's nice. Well, I think when you're building your life, like you are now with your wife and your child on the way, like you got to decide, you've only got so much time and this is your one life and you want to build something great, right? You want to do something great. And I really wanted to have a big career. I wanted to do really well. I was ambitious. I just wanted that. But the other thing I really wanted was to have a great family. And I spent, for better or worse, all my time on only those 2 things. Like, I didn't have a great social life, I didn't have a lot of hobbies, I didn't, I just did those 2 things, and I tried to do them as best as I could, and, that's where I spent my time, and with my kids and everything else, there's really an intentionality about, how what we did for them, and like most people, I wanted to do better than my parents did, and so I learned from what my parents did, and I said, I want my kids to go to the best schools, and I wanna try to get them the best colleges, and I want them to really be smart and learn, and I want them to work hard and make a really outsized contribution to the world based on what their talents are and what they want. And so, that's kind of what I did with my kids. I was like super involved in the schools. I was on the board of I was on the board of 2 schools and the hospital and community foundation and all the kinds of things that you want to do so your kids will see what your commitment to your community is. They will see how you're going to behave as an adult, like what's important to you. And I tried to do that when I was raising them. And then obviously being very involved in them and coaching them each individually on, their own life and their own career, because they're all different people with different skills.
And I think that's really, you touched on something really important is to know your kids and understand what they're good at, what they're not good at, and really be that coach. And I think you do that really well with our family's first generation, but also second generation. Talk a little bit how you think about families and navigating them through generational wealth.
Well, I think like, we were lucky enough that we've done pretty well. But, I think if you think about, money, money is a tool that can really help a family kind of get to that next level. And my parents were very not like materialistic people. And so, they thought money was really to protect a family and to make sure you had the resources to solve problems when they came up, right? So, and that was sort of my view of money. We had nice things and so forth, but I never got carried away with stuff, right? And I think that's important because your children see everything you do, right? I mean, the good stuff you do and the bad stuff you do, like they see it all, and so they're going to repeat your patterns. They're going to learn from you and so forth, and obviously like everybody, we have some good stuff and some bad stuff, right? We're not the Dwyer family is by no means perfect by any stretch. But what I tried to do with my kids was, coach them, down the lane that was best for them. And so very early on, you know who your children are. What their potential is as a human. You know whether they're more of a salesperson or whether they're more analytical, whether they want whether your daughter really just wants to be a full-time mom or she wants a career. Each person is different. And I sort of looked at it, with my children as sort of encouraging each person, in the direction that they were going to be most happy. And I encourage them also to really focus on meeting your mate, right? I mean, your 20s is for building a career and finding your partner, right? Why do I say that? Because we know from all the happiness studies that we look at from Arthur Brooks that, that a big factor in happiness is having family, right? And having a family. And so your 20s is the time where you start looking for that partner, right? And so I really encourage my kids to just to do the normal stuff. Like
Yeah,
which
yeah.
is just the normal. And by the way, I guess today it's not as normal, but that's kind of how I looked at it. And that's how I sort of approach those things. And then with regard to money, I really was like, hey, you need to be ambitious about money. And you need to be ambitious about money because you don't need to be a billionaire, but you probably want to be in the top 10% because in our culture and our system, this is a capitalist system. You're competing with everybody else. So you don't want to be in the bottom half, you want to be in the top half and ideally in the top 10%. And and I kind of, I talked very candidly and practically about those things with my children because this is just reality, right? Life is expensive. And when you make a commitment to another person and to have a family, your job then becomes to protect those children. Your job becomes to make sure that, you're saving money, you're doing responsible things is really about building a moat around the family so that when stuff happens, you can get through it.
By bringing that mode and bringing that intentionality, I think we really see it in our families and why we don't have just first generation, why we have second generation, and why you've been able to serve even third generation families is because of that. And I think I saw that immediately when I met you, that you are so intentional with not only your time, but the people that you spend with time with. You're
Yeah,
very intentional with that.
I am. I mean, I've done a bunch of things wrong. I didn't
Yeah.
give you that list
Yeah.
too. And I would say the things I did wrong was I didn't, take a lot of time for myself. I didn't take care of myself for a big part of my career physically. I started to do that more like the last 5 or 7 years. And, those were mistakes, but of not having the right mentor. And I probably should have picked up a hobby earlier because you need a hobby to reduce stress. I was really, I run pretty hard, and I work really hard. And I think that's important. Now I have some hobbies. If the kids left and I learned how to play golf, that's where I became friends with Greg,
Yeah.
my
Which
partner,
is,
which is like, which is sort of ironic, but I do think it's important to be intentional about the things that you want. And so, like, when we're working with families and, when we go through a planning engagement, we sit down with the families, we're trying to draw out, like, what do you really want? Like, what do you really want? And you should focus your time and your resources on those one or two things. You can't do 20 things. You can't do, if you want to be
you can't
like,
do them well.
right, if you want to be the best at something, you've got to focus and you've got to focus. And the people we work with generally do want to be really good at
Yeah.
whatever they're doing.
That I couldn't agree more. I think the last thing we want to touch on, because we always talk about it, AI being a wildfire. Where do you see it going with the next generation, and how are we positioning our families?
I think like, with technology, you want your children to be using it. You want them to be at the forefront of using that, being aware of it, being aware of the opportunities and the threats that it brings, right? So this is going to be a new game, right? And so last night at dinner, I was with my son and his girlfriend and my wife. We were talking about AI. We're talking about AI at work, what they're doing, how they're using it. All my kids talk about it, where it's creating all kinds of new possibilities for entrepreneurship. And we've been talking about that as a family for like 5 years. Like, this is the greatest time ever to be an entrepreneur. Maybe you should think about that. And one of my children is a technology entrepreneur, and she's doing well at it. And, but that was a new endeavor for us. Like, we hadn't done that as a family. And obviously I'm the founder of this business, but like, it really wasn't a thing in our family, and we're trying to make it a thing because I think it'll actually be like a survival skill.
No,
I think as and I think that the fact that we haven't had really as many entrepreneurs in the family was kind of a negative, because the corporate world was very good to our family.
and I think that's really the next chapter of how we're looking at things, and you being a founder and really trying to create something for the next generation. I'm thankful for you. I'm thankful for your mentorship. I'm excited to continue to build for the next generation to come.
It's great to have you here, Travis.
Yeah, awesome.